It's like getting a sample of how an exec lives.
Yeah, without having to be them. Private jets, you get to ride on.
The fact that you had a screwdriver just so readily available.
I have everything ready.
There is a stereotype that exists for executive assistants.
I had that stereotype.
Like, you're pretty much doing the CEO's task, the president's task. Like, you are pretty much them without being them. I know their wives, I know their children, I know their social security. Is like, I know everything about these people.
How has AI changed the game? Yeah, no, so thank you for coming out. This is awesome. I think when I was thinking of our history together and working, like I only knew you as an EA.
Right.
But then as I looked back on your LinkedIn profile, I was like, oh wow, she has like a little bit of PR experience. She has marketing experience. And then you've been EAs for various VPs.
Yep.
Oh,
For the audience.
oh yeah, for the audience.
What does EA stand for?
Executive assistant.
Oh,
There's
yes.
actually
There
a
you
lot
go.
of acronyms that we're probably going to need to.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
that's fair.
today.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna try
Just
to.
fine.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to make sure we don't
Yes.
use just the acronym.
We're gonna ask really dumb questions, I think, sometimes too.
Please do.
Yeah, because we're dumb.
Well, it's a weird role, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so you've been an executive assistant for like VP of sales, CTOs, a president of a company. Like you have a wide range of experience from EA level 1 to EA level 3, or if they go higher, then they go higher. Cool. So tell us a little bit about how you got started on your path.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into it. My background is I really wanted to be in PR when I was in college. I was really good at writing, communication. I was interested in international studies and going and maybe being a reporter. And then I got out of college and life hit me and I was like, all right, I'm just going to get a job next. That's my next goal.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a job.
That
right?
makes sense.
Sure.
Gotta pay those bills.
Yes.
Got to do that.
Yes.
Met a guy who was going to school at BYU, and I was like, I'll get a local job. It'll be great. And I got a marketing job. I was a marketing assistant, so I learned a lot of design work there. And then that was at the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Utah.
Okay.
So I got a lot of experience, right? I was going out to different hotels, being kind of that communication person. And then I graduated to the PR assistant, which was really cool. And I got to do a lot of writing, but then that writing kind of made me hate PR.
Oh,
So I was
oh
like,
no.
You know, was my passion, and now I'm not loving my
anymore.
passion anymore. Exactly. So I
Yeah.
was looking for something new, and the options were I had an interview for PR writing or an HR, and I was like, you know what? Let's try HR. I bet I could do great. I'm a people person. Let's go.
Sure.
And that was at the company that we talked about previously. So
Yeah.
I went and interviewed there as an HR assistant, and they pulled me out of the meeting real quick and were like, I know this is a little unprofessional, but we have a position for an executive assistant. She's leaving in 2 weeks. Would you like to interview for that? And I was like, I don't know if I have executive assistant skills,
Sure.
but let's do it. I went and interviewed and I got the job that day.
Oh wow. Okay.
Nice.
It's like, all right.
Congrats.
Yeah, me and that executive, we really just clicked and it really worked out. And I remember leaving that interview. I was like, okay, I guess I'm now an executive assistant. And I went and bought a book that was Excel for Dummies, like literally hard
Sure.
copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never read it because then I realized I could just go online.
Oh
and
yeah.
learn
Yeah.
a lot more.
YouTube.
Yeah.
1000% hopped on YouTube. But the person who I was leaving that position, actually, gave her 2 weeks, but she only gave me 2 days and then left after 2 days. But luckily,
Oh, wow.
she was one of the most organized people I've ever known. So I got her computer and I learned so much from her organization that day of just like what needed to happen and how it needed to happen. She had backdates of everything. So I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool. So I just dove in and kind of learned as we went, but there was a lot of embarrassing things that happened along the way, but I learned pretty quickly how to be an executive assistant. It was really cool.
So
That's really
for those who don't know,
Yeah.
like I don't like to like downplay people's jobs.
Or
100%.
You know what I
stereotype.
mean? Or stereotype their jobs.
There is a stereotype.
So there is a
There is a
stereotype that
stereotype.
exists for
Yeah,
executive
I
assistants.
had that stereotype.
Okay, so
of it
even
myself.
even the
me,
job.
I called it monkey work. I was like,
Yeah.
anybody could do
So
it.
yeah, my
Legit.
perspective, like no, okay, not my perspective,
Right.
but some
lot.
people may have the
Not us.
perspective.
You can say it's my perspective. Just put it on me.
Mm-hmm.
Colton's perspective of executive assistants is that they just like
Yeah.
manage a calendar
Yeah.
or order lunch
Uh-huh.
for those sorts of events. So
Or get them coffee.
yeah, or whatever, right? Or take their dry cleaning out because
Yeah.
that's what we see in the movies. That's what people see when they
Right.
talk whatever. So
100%.
for you,
Mhm.
like, help us understand a little bit more of like really what an executive assistant
Yeah.
does.
And it definitely depends on what level of executive assistant you are. Like
Right.
right when I went into it, it was what I called monkey work, just because I was doing the same report every Monday and I was doing the same thing every Tuesday. Like every day had the exact same thing.
Okay.
And I'm more of a dynamic person where I need difference, I need change, I
Mhm.
need something else. And then I learned about the different levels of an executive assistant, right? There's an EA1 who probably just starts out with normal administrative tasks, getting coffee, getting lunch, doing expense reports, and then you move up to mid, which is a person who's probably creating projects, creating presentations, and then you move up to a senior executive assistant who is doing much more than that. I think that is senior executive assistant kind of is the same as a chief of staff almost,
okay.
right? Because
Yeah.
Gotcha.
we're in data analytics, we're in strategic initiatives, we're working really close with every executive in the company trying to make sure that our bosses' initiatives are what's getting pushed forward or getting pushed forward in a timely manner. So there are levels to it. When you're at the bottom, it does feel like a monotonous day and a lot of just the same kind of work. It also depends on the industry you're in, right? Like
Sure.
our last one was retail, so it was really fast and we had different flow through the year. But if you're in healthcare, if you're in something that's more static, then it changes. You have a normal day-to-day, which a lot of people love, but I love difference. So,
Yeah.
which is great with the EA role because you can be something that you can do whatever you want in that sense, right? You can pick a job where you just have to do the same day-to-day, or you could pick a job where every day is different and it's kind of more fast-paced.
So is everything? So you mentioned level 2
Yes.
EA, putting together slides, presentation slides, all that other stuff. So like when say someone works at a corporation and there's this nice PowerPoint slide and it's this chief officer,
Yeah.
like likely it is their EA that put
Right.
that together.
EA or
Like-
chief of staff, right? If they
Okay.
have a chief of staff, the chief of staff is usually the one filling in the information, whereas the executive assistant is the one putting it all together. Because I had a visual background, right? Like I was a designer
Sure.
and I was shoved PowerPoint down my throat growing up. Like I was very meticulous and very creative with my design work. So my executive let me fly with that. Whereas if I wasn't that kind of executive assistant, right? If I didn't have the presentation skills,
Yeah.
which eventually they'd want you to develop, we'd probably turn it to our in-house design team or something like that. to
Gotcha.
develop.
But
So-
you're only like giving the presentation to
The exec
the executive to be like, hey, here, we're just gonna walk through this so that you see it, or would you actually would you ever present?
Oh yeah, all the
Or-
time.
okay.
Public speaking was
Cool.
the thing we did. Yeah, the executive assistant would usually go up, set up the meeting, make sure everything was working, the microphones were on, the presentation was set up, and then probably do the agenda, like conduct the first 5-10 minutes of it, whatever housekeeping items that needed to happen. Then would turn it over to the executive for whatever tasks they needed to talk about, or anybody else that was like a special guest that day that was speaking.
Oh,
And
sure.
then the executive assistant would wrap it up, close everything down, and then be up for the next meeting kind of thing. So it was a fast-paced
Is there really only
type of job.
3 levels? The intro, the mid, and then the third, or does it like continue to?
It depends on your company, right? Like my first company, we were all the same. Every executive assistant was the same. We all just supported one person, and we would have meetings where we would learn new skills together and each take turns running those meetings so we could kind of get those skills and build those skills. But at my last company, it was very much a hierarchy, right? There was, you start at the bottom and you work your way up, or if you were hired into a certain position, you have different pay bands that go along with it.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there is that mid level, that senior level.
Okay. So
And then you jump up after that to.
So you mentioned pay bands. So one question that I had, I was like, if you're an EA for a certain level of chief or VP in the company,
Yes.
there's at least what I would assume in some corporations I've worked in, like they get either an X%, and then if you work for another person, like all the way to the president, your pay is a lot higher.
Right.
Like how does that correlation work with
I mean,
EA
we'll
to?
never make as much as a CEO.
Sure, sure.
Right?
Who
Like,
does?
Yeah, right.
Sky's the limit for them.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for executive assistant, there was actually an interesting conversation I had with my friends at the beginning of my career, just seeing where we all jumped off from in college. And I remember a lot of my friends were like, "Oh, an EA, you're not really going to make that much. You'll probably cap out at 40,000."
Oh, sure. That's
And I
that's the
was
perspective,
like,
right?
My mindset
Yeah.
was 200,000. I was like, "What are you talking about? An executive assistant is pretty much an executive. Like,
Sure.
I'm the man in the chair while they're the front-facing person, right?" So, yeah, no, we can make upwards of 200,000 or more, depending on who you're supporting,
Right.
bonuses,
Yeah.
overtime work, especially, right? Like my pay band was under 100,000, but I made well over that because of all my overtime that I put in.
Sure.
Right? So it does fluctuate. I started in the $40,000 range, which is where people can really expect to start. It depends on your state, depends on
Right.
your company that you're working for. But you can make upwards of 100,000 or more.
Yeah, I
which
think
is
that's
great.
I think that is a stigma that
It
exists. That
is.
I hadn't thought. You
It
think like,
is.
oh well, they're secretaries,
Right.
and secretaries you pay
Right.
40 to 70,000 for whatever, and the best to get,
Mm-hmm.
that's the top of your line.
Yeah, top of your lines, maybe 80, but you
Yeah.
can go well beyond that.
Yeah.
COVID changed the game also for pay bands for executive assistants.
Yeah, why?
Like,
Why do you think that's the case?
completely changed it because it became hard when people came back into office
Mm-hmm.
to find a person who wanted to work full time in office, 9 to 5
Oh.
plus that.
Interesting.
So they started paying executive assistants more. It changed the game because people could work from anywhere, right? You didn't have to find a local executive assistant to help
Oh,
you. You could
yeah.
find one in San Francisco, but they also have a higher pay rate
Sure.
because of cost of living. So it changed in a lot of different ways. It also changed like roles that people needed filled. It changed. My boss needed extra work after work because he wasn't getting a lot of his like personal tasks done. And I was like, I would love extra money. I would love to help you out with those
Sure.
personal tasks, right? So yeah, it kind of just opened up a world for executive assistants to earn more and have more opportunities outside of their current state.
What
That's cool.
what do you and I think you touched a little bit on it. So
Yeah.
we're saying, okay, what are the skills that you would say if like me thinking about, oh, maybe I want to be an executive assistant, and it's kind of a thing that I'm considering going into.
Yeah.
You say, look, if you're going to be an executive assistant, here's some soft skills, here's some hard skills. These are the things that you definitely either should know, should be able to do, or should work on.
So that's also changed because
Oh,
of COVID.
okay. Interesting.
So when I first started, it was just hard skills, really. Like I had soft skills of like my personality was fun and I could like get along with people. I'm an empath and an intuit, so I would like know what people wanted, right? I
Sure.
could anticipate needs, those are great soft skills to have as an EA. But the hard skills is what they wanted. They were like, if you could do PowerPoints, if you could do Word, if you knew G Suite, if you knew Microsoft Suite, then we want you. But now it's like, you need to know data analysis. You need to know how to make a presentation from top to bottom. You need to then present the presentation. You need to make all these trade shows. You also need to do the travel top to bottom. You might have to travel with me because I need you there, right? So it's completely different now. It's more of a demanding role, I think, whereas it used to be just administrative tasks, just that administrative assistant. But now it's, I think you're diving into chief of staff type roles, and they're kind of merging that.
The chief of staff. What do you I just hit myself in the face. What do you see as being more the difference between like a chief of staff and an executive assistant?
Yeah. That's a great question. When I first started at my last company, I was partnered with a chief of staff, which is something I'd never had before. I was always just my own executive assistant. I did it all. I loved having a chief of staff. It was just, I didn't have to do it all, right? Like I had the data person, I had the mind person. They went to the meetings and acted as the liaison between the stakeholders and the executive. They were kind of that front person, representative of that. During that tenure at my company, they cut chief of staff. So like, we don't need them anymore. Executive assistants can do that work. Like we're going to have executive assistants do that work. We don't need it. And I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So I'm happy I had her to show me what it was, because if I hadn't had her, I would have had to Google it and YouTube how to become a chief of staff, which is kind of why my company is where it is right now, or why I see the gap and the need for it. Because when I was an executive assistant starting out, I would go buy a book on how to be an executive assistant, listen to a podcast on how to be an executive assistant. But how do you marry the two, executive assistant and chief of staff? And how do you do that without going beyond into other, like wearing too many hats, I guess, is what I'm saying. Because, I mean, I did legal work. I did HR work. I was interviewing people. I was on the football team designing for work after school for my boss. You know what I mean? Like, I was doing a lot of things. So I learned a lot about boundaries and how to establish healthy boundaries, because you're working so much, especially when you're in that senior role, right? Like a mid and a entry level, you can expect a 9 to 5. You expect to go home at 5 and not be called.
Yeah.
If you're a senior, your phone is being paid for by the company pretty much.
Right.
You're on call 24/7. So night and day can become a little cross-faded. So having those healthy boundaries are so beneficial.
So what does someone have to, so talking about healthy boundaries, right? And say someone is really like, I want to be a senior EA. That sounds fun to them for whatever reason, right? They feel like
fun.
I
think it's fun.
That's
But
great.
yeah, no, it's crazy.
What are some realities that they have to really consider for that work-life balance, or being on call 24/7?
Yeah.
Like all of those. Like what are some of those things? It's like you need to be okay with X, and are you doing kid pickups from school and whatever else?
Yep. I early on kind of just took any kind of executive assistant job I could get to just build my rapport, build my resume. But as I was nearing the end of my in-office executive assistant work, I really realized that like I wanted to pick an executive that I knew I could work with, right? Like I was very picky. I applied for so many different jobs just that I thought were fun. And then when I went to interview with who I was supposed to meet with, if the energy was off, I was out. I was like, I have to work with you 24/7 for however many years this works for. Like if our energy is not going to work, I can't do it because it can be so draining. So I remember going into my last interview and I was just like, yes, the energy is here. And I got hired on the spot. I was like, this is the way it needs to go. But if I didn't have the background that I had, right, like especially being a senior executive assistant, if I didn't have all of the work that I put in, I wouldn't have gotten hired. So I would say to anybody trying to become an executive assistant or where to start or things to know about being an executive assistant, you need to be able to multitask. You need to be able to keep a secret. If you can't keep a secret, don't apply to
Oh,
be an
yes.
Do
EA.
you have to sign NDAs and stuff too?
I've never signed one, but a lot of people do, right?
Oh, okay.
There was a lot of times where I was privy to information that I didn't want to be, so I just didn't look at it, right? Like I had access to their email, to their phone, and there would be times where my executive would be like, oh, did you see that in my email? And I was like, nope, do you want me to? And he was like, oh, no, don't worry about it, right? So I'm the kind of person who if I don't need to know it, I don't need to know it because there's so much going on in my head. I think that's also a misconception about EAs is that we know everything.
Right.
Because sometimes we don't, sometimes we do. And that's also really hard because if you know something's happening, you can't tell other people about it.
Right.
Or a
Both the
riff
good
is
and the
happening,
bad.
good
Yeah.
and bad, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell anybody. You're kind of alone in that. So can you be alone in your feelings? Can you be dynamic? Can you be working on a task and a project and put so much into it and then that get cut, right? Like you don't know if you're going into the day running a marathon or a sprint or just a jog, and you don't get to decide that. It gets decided for you. So you got to be really able to pivot and be anticipatory and be multitasking and flexible at the same time. If you can't do that, it's probably not the job for you.
Speaking of that, then, could you tell us about a time, like a really either positive or really negative or, you know, both, experience that you might have had that like really kind of helped solidify like the role or like the experience, be like, oh yeah, this is what this is like, or this is, or even things that where you're like, maybe that's not really within my boundaries.
Yeah, there are times that like, for instance, I would go into my boss's office and I'm like, hey, my tasks are done. What else do we need? And he would give me an option of the things that needed to happen. And he'd be like, hey, can you do this? And I would either pick or choose what I could or couldn't do. And that would also let him know the skills that I needed to work on, which was good for that. But there were many times where he would just open the door and be like, I need this written. I need cue cards for a meeting that's in a different country. I need it in 5 minutes. Can you Google the company and look it up? I would just be like, yeah, sure. I mean, AI chat wasn't really that popular when that was happening, right? So I was just like, yeah, let's do this. I feel like there are a lot of stories of just like getting pulled into different meetings that then elevate you to a different status, right? Like I used to be the EA that would just like set up chairs in front of the meeting, but then there was a technological issue that nobody knew how to answer. And I was like, oh, I got this. And so I walked up to the front and I figured out how to do it. And then I became the executive assistant who set up all the meetings and ran all the meetings and did everything like that. The technological girl. So it's cool because you can showcase skills that they don't know you have.
Yeah.
But then if you show all your cards, you kind of become that person who is that, right?
Sure.
So there was an executive deck once that our internal designer was out of town, and I had always helped him with the slides because I like design.
Mm-hmm.
And he had told an executive, he was like, hey, pull her in. She's got this. And he pulled me in. It was the CEO, and he pulled me in. He's like, hey, you got these slides? And I was like, sure, I can do it. Sure. And then I became the girl who also did the slides instead of the main designer.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
yeah, it's a give and take, right? Like you want to put your best foot forward and you want to have growth because you can, right? Like there's executive assistants, even at my last company, who became the chief people officer.
Oh, yeah.
So there's growth, but it depends on how much growth you want, right? Like my last job I got, and I was 10 months out of having a baby, and I was just like, oh my gosh, do I want to do this? And he saw it on my face. He was like, hey, if you don't want to do this, I get it, but like give it 3 months. And I was like, okay, I'll give it 3 months. And it worked out. And then I grew with him, right? He was the SVP, and then he became the president, then he became the CEO. And because my skills kept elevating, I got to go along with him on that ride, which was the best for my career because I went from being a VP all the way up to a CEO. So that really just pushes you forward.
That's
but
really
it's
cool.
because I was with the right person.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
If I had a person who didn't like me, then
That's interesting
what it
that that like so much and it makes sense, right? That so much of your experience as an executive assistant is so tightly coupled with who you're assisting, which I mean, obviously it makes sense when you think about it, but also it's very similar to like any other job, right? Like oftentimes people quit because of their manager, and it's essentially the same thing, right? It's just you are their direct report, you report to no one else, and that's pretty much it, right?
Right, which was also interesting because I feel like my last position, my boss hired me, and he was like, hey, I have a reputation of not being so nice, apparently.
Oh,
I don't think that about me, but people have said that about me. And he's like, I need someone who's nice to be my front man. Like, I need someone with good energy to like shield people, I guess, and which I was. And it's so weird because you get to see this different side of your boss, right? Like I know their wives, I know their children, I know their social securities, like I know everything about these people. And then there's the opinion of all the employees of them at work, right? Like my boss wasn't really liked, and I never understood it. I'm like, guys, he's the best. Like you guys are crazy to not like him, but it's completely different, like the professional relationship, right? So that was an interesting behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where you let's see, for lack of better terms, I feel like there's a lot of like yes man things, right? They say, hey, I need this, or like, yes, on it, got it. Has there ever been a time where you're like, no, and you just completely disagree with what that exec is telling you? Like how did that end up, and what are, because
or how do you handle that?
Yeah, how do you handle those situations?
I've actually gotten fired in the past for that kind of situation. It was over something.
So sometimes you
I got fired over pizza. That's what everybody knows about me at that job. Yeah, I took the hit from my boss. He apparently wasn't supposed to use any of their budget, and he asked me to order pizza for the entire technological department.
Oh, sure.
So I did. And then when the pizza arrived, our CEO found out, and he was like,
what is
this pizza? And my boss threw me under the bus. He was like, yeah, she totally ordered it. Didn't even tell her to.
Oh, wow.
I was like, what? Yeah, I eventually got fired over it. And in that
you're like pulling up the text messages.
I was like,
yep. No.
I was like, I'm getting a lot of severance if this is how it's going, because you know, it is what it is. But I mean, that's the worst side of it. But there are, I don't know, I'm a really like happy person who, I don't say that I don't like conflict, but I like to manage conflict in a way that it can become better, right? Like you are in so many positions where people are in hot seats when you're an executive assistant, right?
Yes.
Like you might have an executive who's yelling at people in front of you, like get
your
job done, do better, right?
Yes.
And then I have to
like legit yelling.
all right, let's
like full
legit
full
yell.
bore.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Angry.
Right.
Yes.
Cussing.
Okay.
And then I have to come up and be like, all right, I need to schedule some follow-up meetings with you guys. Is that cool? Like, I'm now going to be your personal task manager because that's my new assignment. So it can be really hard, but I feel like if you just treat people like people, right? Like it's a hard position no matter what you're in. We all have to work toward the greater goal of the company. I just treat people like people. When they're having a hard time, I say, let's take a minute. Let's take a beat. When an executive that I've disagreed with, my last boss, we really didn't disagree on a lot. But if my boundaries were pushed, like, hey, I need you to stay late. And I said, can't. I have my kids here. at the office, I got to go home and take them home. And when I get home, I then need to do my at-home things.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that was always kind of a point of contention because things needed to get done. I was like, all right, I'll come in and I'll work extra hours.
Yeah.
I'll get paid for those extra hours, right? So it's really just about the boundaries that you lay down. I think a lot of executive assistants that I've worked with in the past have been like scared of executives, right? Like they're just like, yes, I will do that. I will do that.
Sure.
I wasn't raised like that. I was raised to push back. I was
Sure.
raised to like speak my mind because why wouldn't I, right? Like no, I always think of CEOs and SVPs as just intelligent people who got those jobs because they were smarter, because they had the experience, right? But that didn't make them better than anybody, which is I think where people kind of get that balance from, right? There were people who I would set up meetings with my boss and they're like, oh my gosh, I got this meeting. It's so exciting. Like I get 20 minutes. And that would always like humble me because I was like, oh yeah, like I get to spend all this time with this like stakeholder who is mentoring me and is teaching me a lot along the way, but they only get 20 minutes with them, right? So I would always help them try and get more time or try and get more knowledge of him before going in. So it would help them. Yeah.
Would you say that someone who does really well at being an EA, if they have just a couple attributes, strong-willed, confident in themselves, and they're able to stand their ground, but also just easy to communicate, willing to work and tackle things and learn, that they would do pretty well. Like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
you were doing well. But then a person popped into my mind that I used to work with who was strong-willed, outspoken, was good at assuming tasks, but didn't get along with anybody. Butted heads with everybody. Every time they sent an email, were like demanding or expecting this because their boss was this level or they were at this level, right? So yes, if you are strong-willed and it can work out, but you have to have those soft skills. You have to have the emotional intelligence, which I think is really lacking actually in a lot of executive assistants is understanding how to work with people and not just doing the task. And I mean, that can obviously lead to burnout too, because you're just trying to manage so much, right? You're not only doing the hard work, the hard skills, you're doing all the soft skills too.
Is it, I mean, because you've said a couple times like overtime.
Yeah.
Are all positions, EA positions, are they hourly or are they salary?
Like I definitely wanted to make sure I talked about
today.
Hourly versus
how does that work?
Salary. Yeah. So when I first started, everyone I always heard about, they were like, salary. You want salary. Salary is like the big top. That's what you want to get to. And then I had an EA pull me aside and she was like, you want hourly and let me tell you why. I was like, all right, tell me why. Yeah. Because when you're salary, you just get the amount you make no matter how many hours you work. Right. Like it just is what it is. When you're hourly, your hours count, and then you hit that 40 hours, and then you go into overtime. So whereas a salary employee would work 60 hours and get paid the same, an hourly employee would work 60 hours and get paid much, much more.
Sure.
So I always negotiated that I was hourly if I was an EA, no matter what, because it's very important to get that overtime. Like if you're working that much, like you're pretty much doing the CEO's task, the president's task. Like you are pretty much them without being them. Yeah. So if I'm going to do all that work, I'm going to get paid for it as well.
How easy, or do you want to talk about hourly salary stuff?
Oh no, my question was actually just thinking about everything we talked about so far was like how does time off actually work for you?
Yeah. How does it work?
How does it work?
When you're lower level executive assistant, it works just normal. You take your PTO. You might not need coverage, but when you're a senior level, you have to have coverage, right? So when we were in the office of the CEO, the CEO's EA or the finance EA would be my cover. And if I was out of town, they would step in. But it depends on how long I was out of town, right? Like there was once I took a week and he was like, all right, well, I need my emails looked at and I don't know if I can trust the finance EA to look at my email because like we can't cross department.
Right, because they don't like each other. Exactly. No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe.
Some don't like each other.
Some don't. Some work well together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to find that coverage, which I always had my point person, and I called her my work wife, and we would just work. And she was like, I need to take this time off. I'm like, great, I got you covered. She had me covered. So it's really cool to find people who your boss can trust and you can trust. But if they can't, then it usually is limited to how long you can take your PTO.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And your point person usually was another EA, or in some cases you could actually find someone else.
Yeah. And it had to be a department where like your boss could trust them.
Oh, of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I mean, it seems like that's like it's like a recurring theme, right? When it comes to a lot of this is
trust, confidentiality.
Yeah.
It's all loyalty. It's pretty important as an executive assistant.
Interesting. What was your question?
Well, I had 2 questions.
Oh,
I think another came up. So there's a Hollywood movie about a devil wearing some type of high brand thing. I think
that movie.
I think a lot of like
the stereotype
EA,
comes from that.
100%. But I feel like that is very much focused on like the EA level 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Well.
But then in the beginning, right? Yes, and then she progresses.
Yep.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how Hollywood or media has perceived EAs versus how EAs actually are, and how do people kind of differentiate and kind of get out of the stereotype of what is being told to them what an EA is versus kind of like what we're talking about today?
That's a great question. In the past, I think a lot of depends on the executive, right? Like my executives, I've had executives that are just like, yeah, it's just my assistant. Like how they treat me, other people will reflect that. In my last position, he would get an award and the first person he would thank would be his wife and then me. And I was like, that's huge, right?
That's
like
cool.
Saying that the next person who helped me the most was my executive assistant. So I think it starts with the executive and how they treat you in front of other people. Because my boss would treat me with so much respect that everybody else would treat me with so much respect. And then I'd go home and I wouldn't get that much respect. And I was like, do you guys know who I am? Like, excuse me? But
people have very high expectations of me.
You guys don't understand how important I am. You guys are crazy. Exactly.
You're lucky to get 20 minutes with
like
me
my
right
mom,
now.
I was like, what's happening? Right?
Next time you want to talk to me, schedule a meeting.
Schedule it, please. Yeah, but I don't know about changing the perception out there, because unless you're in it or like we worked together, right, Colton, and you only saw a certain percentage of what I did and then ran with that knowledge of whatever you thought of me. And then I would surprise other people when I would do other tasks and they're like, oh,
you know how to do
that
this?
you did this. I didn't know that you could do this. I didn't know that EAs did do that. So, I mean, it's just getting to know your executive assistants at your work, your office, treating them with respect, treating them as you would a manager, because they're doing a manager's job, they're doing a director's job, they have their hands in everything. They're not as into the full project, the full scope of the project, but I mean, I had my hands in everything.
It's
it
true.
was crazy.
Multiple cookie jars.
So many cookie jars.
I had an EA that I knew from one of my previous jobs, and just to go on the tangent of what you're saying, like you could do all sorts of things. There was it was a recent event. We had done a new release, and I wanted to like reward kind of like the team, and there was a theme to it, not relevant, but there was a little stuffed animal that I wanted to get for everybody. And I was just kind of like casually talking to a few people about it, and then they're like, oh yeah, go ask so and so. And I'm like, the executive assistant? I'm like, yeah, she gets things done. I'm like, okay, well, I'll go talk to her. So I went to her and I was just like, is there any way you can get this sort of thing?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, give me a couple days. And then like 2 days later, she's like, here's the stuffed animal. It's got a little handkerchief around it. We can actually brand it with our brand on it, and they cost X amount of dollars. Do you want them? Yes or no? How many do you want?
Oh, yeah, do you want her number? I'm building a suite of great executive assistants.
We'll talk after.
They're actually kind of hard to find, I think. Like,
okay, yeah, we'll talk after. So thinking about that, we talked a little bit about like skills. One thing I know that a lot of people have is like they talk about education still being the case. Like for the EAs, is it still kind of like expected that you definitely should have like a college degree? And if so, like, is there something like people kind of lean towards, or is it like, nah, if you could do this sort of stuff, we don't care?
PhD of organization.
Entry level, you don't need a diploma. All you need is your high school diploma, your GED. And when you're a senior level, and you're interviewing for a senior level, they do have it listed on your the job description that they want someone who has had a bachelor's degree. However, being an EA who was in charge of hiring other EAs for seniors, if I saw that they only had a high school diploma, but they had 8 years of experience supporting an SVP, you're in, right?
And great recommendations.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And I think it's less about having that bachelor's degree. I think the notion of universities is also changing a lot these days. It's more about the things that you're continuing your education, right? Like, are you getting those certifications that prove that you can be an executive assistant? Are you doing any other kind of things to support your education as an executive assistant. Those are the things that I think job hunters are looking for.
Sure. Like
for.
what sort of certifications though would you?
You could get, I think there's something called a CAP. There's a executive assistant, just to kind of prove your skills.
Sure.
It's like a test you take, and then it says,
interesting.
yes, they do know how to do Excel. Yes, they do know how to do PowerPoint. They do, like, you write copy, and they do know how to do these things. So you can put that on your resume, but unless like a job hunter is familiar with those type of things, they're going to be like, oh, great, you got some credits. But I was like a Salesforce master at my last company.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I had that, and I had all those certifications, and they're like, oh, data entry, perfect. We'll pick her for that.
Yeah.
Right? So
Nice.
I say anything you can say on your resume about any experience you had. I did an internship in Belize where sometimes I was taking blood pressure, but sometimes I was working with the Peace Corps and making like lesson plans for them and helping people with their resume skills. So I didn't add the part about the blood work, but I did add the part about all the public relations tasks that I did, right? Like as many tiny things that you can do to build your skills, continue to build your skills. And yes, going online and getting those certifications and trainings can be helpful, but I think real experience, hands-on experience is what people really need.
They want to see, are they dynamic?
Yes.
Can they handle anything that I throw at them? Can they respond in a timely manner?
Right, exactly.
Can they like, it's like one of those roles, which I think to some degree, like they expect of themselves,
yes,
in like the C level, right? That
you
they're
are
saying,
a reflection of them.
Yeah, that they're
100%.
saying, I expect of myself, like we don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And getting a person to be in that role, to be able to handle whatever is coming next, right? And that they're going to do it in a way that's going to be either efficient or effective.
You're also a reflection of your boss and your company, right? So like when I got my last job, I stopped posting on social media. I was just like, I was scared to post anything because I feel like I have such liberal views and I didn't want any of that to reflect on my boss or my job or anything like that.
Sure.
So can you still be yourself while almost embodying someone else, right? Like you have to become your boss at that senior level.
Mm-hmm.
I had to know how he was going to respond to an email. I had to know what he's going to say in a meeting if he wasn't there. I had to know everything about him, and then having to then go home and then separate, okay, now who am I versus who they are, because I was reflecting that all day. Now I have to reflect myself and also get all my all my chores done, all my tasks done for my family and myself to keep myself going. So if you can do that, then great. But a lot of people do hit that burnout wall, or that wall where they're just like, I don't really know who I am anymore.
I'm curious about going back to the education piece.
Yeah.
The amount of AI tools that are out now, right? Like I love it. I could hit up some program and say, hey, I need a PowerPoint that says this. It needs to be 5 slides. I need to have a generated photo of someone doing this on every slide, right? How has AI changed the game of being an EA?
Yeah, that was a big topic of conversation in the last few years with my colleagues, because they were like, AI is going to take over our job, right? Like, there's now a virtual assistant who can book a flight for our boss and who can just do it all.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, which is wild.
Awesome.
But also crazy awesome is what
crazy
I meant to say.
But it leaves out the human fact, right? It leaves out the anticipatory needs. It leaves out if I ask AI to write me a speech for 5 people who are in marketing who need to hear something nice.
Sure.
Right? It can write me that speech, but it doesn't know who's in the room. It doesn't know the voice of my executive. It can't really tailor anything specific to that. So where AI is saving so much time, right? I can say, write me this speech, and then I can go through and edit it, and tailor it.
Sure.
I'm not spending that hour writing it. Love that. I love AI for making presentations, but then again, there's been so many times where I've had AI do that for me, and there have been so many mistakes in it.
Right,
I spend more time fixing the mistakes or the formatting because of that situation. Or there's a picture, or I've asked it to generate, and it has something in the background, or if the person has 5 fingers, or that's normal. 6 fingers. And I'm like, oh, didn't really catch that, right? It also, I don't know, it's hard as a designer to be like, yeah, I love it when they can do the design work for me, because I also love doing the design work, right?
You want to critique it.
It's helpful, but I don't think it will ever replace the executive assistant. It can replace tasks for sure and help, like for expense reports, do all of that for me. Thank you so much. I trust you with numbers. But I don't think it will replace it. I think it'll only enhance it. And I think the more that you can learn about different AI tools, different AI software, to help your executive, go for it.
So thinking about general advice from
Yeah.
you, right? Like saying anyone who is either considering being one or
Yeah.
kind of starting off the first path of their career
Mm-hmm.
in one of these roles, what would be like your general advice as someone who is coming from a senior level coming down, and turning to these other folks and saying, hey,
Yeah.
if I could turn back time
Oh,
myself, what are some big learnings
I would
that you
have
would have?
started earlier.
Oh,
I didn't.
okay.
I thought an executive assistant had to be a certain age and they had to have certain knowledge, right?
Mhm.
Like, if I would have known, I wouldn't have worked at the Cold Stone Creamery as a manager. I would have.
Oh, you would have just jumped
Oh.
straight into
I would have
AE.
jumped straight into working as an EA because, like, I could have started as an
AE,
office
I said.
manager.
I said
Sorry.
AE. No.
I could have started at the front desk and I could have worked my way up a lot sooner. I could have been making mad money when I was younger than instead of just like, the hourly wage that I was.
Right. Making ice cream.
Yeah,
is that what you
exactly.
said?
I was managing the shop.
Oh,
at
of
that
course,
point,
of
right?
course.
Uh,
I expected nothing less.
She was
Of
telling other
course.
people how to make the ice cream.
Yeah, I'm like, you make it like this. Yeah. I would also, I have this theory that any mom who's just like, I kill it at home. I get all my tasks done.
Yeah.
I got it. I anticipate the needs of everyone, and
Like
I'm on top of it.
laundry and
Yes.
washing
Yes.
dishes and
You could
yeah.
be an executive assistant. I have so many girlfriends that are like, oh, I just can't do that. I don't think I'd be good enough. Or guys that just don't think that guys can be executive assistants because it's
sure.
a girl's world,
Right.
right? Like,
that stereotype.
we loved hiring men. I was like, thank you. Like, it's all about your mindset. It's all about being able to multitask, being able to just complete a job with pride. I think that's, if tasking lights you up, which it does for me. Like, I love just getting my to-do list done. I love creating one. I love finishing it. I love organizing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's just who I am. If that's you, try and be an executive assistant.
It's so funny
like-
because that's totally my wife.
That's cool.
I know, right? I honestly think any wife could be an executive assistant. They would just kill
Any
it.
good wife.
But,
No, I'm just
I
kidding.
mean, any good tasking wife, right? Because
Yeah.
my house is a mess right now.
Oh.
So it ebbs and flows.
it's just because it's
It
not
ebbs and
on the
flows.
list.
Exactly. I'm not getting paid, I think.
That's right.
That's why it's messy.
If you got
right
paid
now.
hourly
If I got paid
and
out,
overtime,
I ask my husband all the time, I'm like, will you pay me if I do these tasks?
I'll
He's
put
like,
these
no.
I'll put these
Yeah.
on my
Right.
checklist. They'll be
Exactly.
on there
I'll add a lot of things. I'll
for
take your tasks too.
$55 an hour.
Where's
Mhm.
where's the good working husband?
I know,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Where's
true.
the TAM? I'm actually kind of executive assisting my husband right now. His time management is wild. He'll be doing something. I'm like, where's your focus? Where's this going? He's like, yeah, I just don't have it. I'm like, great. I'm your assistant. now.
Okay, I got
Give
you.
me your calendar. I'm like, we're going to get you done. Yeah. But it depends on your role, right? From AM to PM, it's different. When I was entry level, mid level, I would just wake up and go to work and then start my day at
Yeah.
work. When I was a senior executive assistant, the first thing I did when I woke up, I was like, did anything change last night?
Oh yes.
How are
Oh,
any
yeah.
meetings here?
Yeah.
Does your executive go and delete meetings during the day?
Oh no.
I've had people who've had executives like that. Mine did not, thankfully. But
Mm.
yeah, it was really, it's morning to night thing. Morning, I'd wake up. What's my task? What are we doing? I'd call my executive. We'd get a one-on-one. We'd get into work. I'd do all my daily tasks. At the end of the day, I'd do my follow-ups. I'd go to him again and ask if there's anything that I missed, if there's anything tomorrow that I need to be anticipating that's on a schedule. Is he actually going on that trip next week? I need to book it. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it was a lot of just keeping on top of tasks. When I left my last job, I remember just breathing because my alarm every 25 minutes, my alarm clock would go off because like that would hit 5 minutes till his next meeting.
Oh
Or
sure.
5 minutes until I had to get these
Yeah.
meeting topics down or done. So it was just nice to kind of put my phone down and step away from technology. I actually think I didn't touch my laptop for 6 months.
Wow.
Wow,
Like,
that's awesome.
I need to just step out of this world. So yeah, you really got to create a balance.
I think people do underestimate, in many cases, especially depending on the size of an
yeah.
organization.
Oh, yeah.
The amount of things
Yeah.
that kind of like come across the
Mhm.
plate of people who are in these roles.
Right.
Everything from information to just
Mhm.
like FYIs
Mhm.
to
Yeah, you're also the eyes and
decisions.
ears of your boss, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
he would come out and be like, "What's the chatter on the floor?
Yeah,
What's
That's
going
what
on
I'm
out there?
feeling.
like,
that's true.
What's
how
the
are they
sentiment?
feeling?" Because
Yeah.
like I'm being told one thing, but what's actually
especially
happening out
after
there?
something
Yes.
significant happens.
Oh yes.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was always the hardest part.
I loved
Like knowing that.
having EAs as like close friends.
Oh,
I feel like
yeah. Oh,
we were
yeah.
pretty good
We were,
friends, right?
yeah.
And there were other EAs at the company that we worked
Yeah.
together, and it was like like something would be happening.
Yes.
And then it's like you would kind of hear what's going on.
Never anything confidential.
would
Clear.
Never anything
Never
confidential.
anything
Yes.
confidential.
Just rumor mill stuff.
Right.
But it was like, oh yeah, no, like I
Interesting.
already got the lowdown from
Right.
so and so.
Well, whenever people would think that something was happening or there was a rift, the first person they'd be like, is there a rift
Yes.
happening? Is
Yeah.
something happening?
Yeah.
What's her mood? It's almost like
Yeah.
when there's turbulence, you look at the flight attendants, you're like,
Yeah.
Should
what's
I be
happening? Should I be worried? If they're calm, I'll be calm.
That's right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like that for executive assistants. They look and they assess. They're like, all right, she's freaking out. She's a little
That's
frantic.
right,
Something's
that's right.
going on. She's usually calm.
Oh no,
so-
the flight attendant has a life
Exactly.
jacket on.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
it's
if
a
you
lot
don't
like
see
that.
any of them, that's
Mhm.
also a concern.
Oh no.
That's
Where
true.
did all the
You're like,
life?
they're
Where did they
usually
go?
here. Where did they go?
Yes.
They're all in a meeting together,
Yep.
learning some information.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm curious
Oh, yeah.
on job or company hopping
Yeah.
with EAs.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like maybe this is just an incorrect stereotype I have in my mind, but like top dogs of a company
Yeah.
in a certain industry
Mm.
are probably well connected with other top dogs
are.
in either competitors or
Yeah.
whatever, right? So if you are in a place of like, I don't really like my boss.
Yeah.
I've been really good
I've been
as
in
an
that
EA.
place
I
many
want to go
times.
somewhere else.
Yep.
Like, how does either I know poaching is usually frowned
Yes.
upon. Like, how does like moving
Mm.
companies work, poaching work, or
Yeah.
recruiting, or any of that other stuff? Like help me understand that.
When I was looking at EAs to hire, I would have a lot of resumes come across my desk, and I noticed a pattern of like every 2 to 3 years, the EAs were hopping jobs, right?
Oh.
Sure.
And that's kind of, I mean, there are people who've stayed in positions for 5 to 10 years, and they have like, those are more small town, I feel like, assistants. But
Yeah.
when you're in like a fast-paced industry or a place that has so many different options, poaching happens all the time, right? Like if you're not happy at your position, if you're not making enough,
Right.
you could always go find somewhere else, which is I think why loyalty an executive looks for that so hard, because you can always, maybe it's better on the other side, but I need someone who's going to be loyal to me.
Sure.
For my background, I hopped every 2 to 3 years too. That was kind of where I was until I found my last position with an executive who I actually like respected and cared for and was my mentor. I think I've worked with him the longest. That was 5 years,
Wow.
which is kind of long for an executive. But when they're in those higher positions, right, like a president or a CEO, they want someone who's going to be around as long as they're in that position,
Yeah.
right? You don't want someone who's going to just turn over
Right.
and go like that. But it's kind of an expectation that you can expect an EA to stay in their role for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years before you can anticipate them wanting to move on to something else or move up. Also, as an EA, you want career growth, right? You don't just want to stay in that role. And I think that executives also need to admire that, look up to that, and
Sure.
Yeah.
just get over that, because
Recognize, appreciate,
exactly.
yeah, and understand.
I'm going to want to
yeah.
be an EA1, then an EA2, and an EA3, and then a chief of staff, and then a VP maybe. Like that's maybe my
Sure.
career path. And you want to find a person who's going to help you along that path. My boss would always, every year, he'd be like, all right, what are you wanting to leave? How are you feeling? Like, do you want more? And I was so comfortable with what I was doing, where I was at. I was always like, no, please don't give me any more. Don't
No,
give me any less.
no.
like,
I've
I love
nested.
where I'm at.
I'm good.
I'm nesting.
Yeah.
Just add some extra dollars at the end of that paycheck.
Exactly,
yeah.
but we would try to poach other people, but if we didn't have the budget for it, we couldn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do use that as like a bargaining tactic. They're like, well, I have been offered this at this position. You can match it, I'll go with you. And we're like, well, we don't have the budget, we can't match it. And
Sorry.
they're like, I was just joking. We will take your position. I'm like,
Oh,
oh,
nice try.
interesting.
Yeah.
Unique. But yeah, networking, I think, though, is one of the most important things you could do as an executive assistant. I think that that's what got me a lot of jobs. People knew my name. They'd be like, oh, NaTaya, I've heard about you. I was like, oh, thank you.
Nice.
I love that. I love when I hear that. But it opens doors otherwise closed, right? Like you know someone who knows someone who needs an EA, or you
Yeah.
know someone who's worked with that person. Like I've worked with one executive multiple times. He's hopped companies and I've left, gone somewhere else, and then he'd call me up and be like, hey, I don't know if you like your job right now, but I have an opening.
But I
'Cause
need
was
someone.
Like, yeah, let's do it.
And I know you're good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or he's like, hey,
That's
I'm
a-
setting up an office. Can you just help me get it set up? And then you don't have to do more, or you can if you want to. So it's really cool because I know a lot of executives in this area. I've gone to a lot of the business events.
Sure.
So you get kind of familiar with who the executives are, who the executive assistants are. And we always love new executive assistant blood. I really do think that there's a shortage of great executive assistants, especially trying to hire for them. I was always
Yeah.
like, you have these skills, but, or you can do this, but
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There wasn't ever just oh yeah, we want to hire you. You're great. Let's do it. It's being teachable, I think, is one of the most important things is an EA, because a teachable person can grow.
Where do you find oftentimes people who go into becoming an EA and then they find out they don't like it?
Yeah.
Where do they often transition to into other, like what other types of roles?
Project management,
Okay.
product management. One just recently went to be an HR director. I know one that went to be a VP at a different company in a marketing department. Some just completely hop out of the EA game and jump into a completely different skill set, right? Like if I had my design background, I could also just lean on that and stop being an EA completely.
Sure.
I'm kind of in that role where I stopped being a EA in office and I'm trying to do more of a virtual role, right? More of a virtual training and mentorship kind of role. So there's a lot of different things that you could, a jump off point, career change. But I think the great thing about an EA is I could do my career change. I could go completely a different way, but if I ever needed to come back home to my EA, I could. It's just a really good thing to have in your pocket.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those stereotypes I think still exists for EAs is like the idea that like, oh, you get pigeonholed when you become an EA. That you're just kind of like, eh.
Right.
But like the reality is that if the people that hire for these jobs that truly know the scope that an EA actually covers, they recognize that, oh no, you can be a project manager and you can be really good at it if you've been an EA before because you've done this. Right.
And I usually tailor my resume. So part of my company is resume building because resumes are what they look at first, right? That's your first thing that you see of anybody. Every company I applied for, I would tailor my resume to that company, right? Like I would go and look at their job description. I would take keywords that they said and I would put them in my resume. If I didn't have the skill, I would work on that skill until I mastered it, and then I would put it on my resume. I have a master list of all my skills that I have, and then I pull from that and I put it on resumes. I have a master list of all the things that I've ever done, and I pull that for what I need to do, right?
Yeah.
And I want to teach people how to do that because I don't think a lot of people do that. I'm like, let me see your resume, and they show me their resume. I'm like, yeah, but you've also done this, and you've also done that, and you also have these skills. And
sure.
Do people really need to see that on a resume? But they do.
Yeah.
Resumes are still very important. But you could also get a job through networking. So hey, I know a person, I'll slide this on your desk and just get him an interview. So
for sure. So I know you've mentioned this a couple times. Tell us about your company. Like the name, what your purpose is, what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah. Because I feel like it is very relevant for this topic of what we're talking about.
For sure. It's called the Universal Assistant. So it's basically just anybody who wants to get started as an assistant, where to get started, what to know, and how to get you there, right? So I take you all the way from baby, EA doesn't know anything, getting your resume, getting your cover letter. I also offer mentorship or like interview practice questions type of thing. And then career growth options too. Like if you're an EA and you're stuck in your job, you're an EA1, how do I scale that? How do I grow? I never got the title of chief of staff, which I was really sad about because I could have. But having been kind of that hybrid of senior executive and chief of staff, I really want to educate people on why you need the chief of staff skills as an executive assistant, why you need more than just PowerPoint or anything like that. When I would interview, there was a lot of people who even were interviewing who didn't understand that they needed to do more and be more. They were just like, oh, I didn't know that I had to know how to do PowerPoint, or I didn't know that I had to know Office Suite and G Suite. Like I didn't know that. So I think there was really just like a knowledge gap because there is this stereotype. So I kind of want to squash the stereotype and educate people on how to be the best EA you can be with both soft and hard skills.
And is your company built to essentially just follow them all from point A to point B to wherever they end their journey? Or is it just kind of a pushing off starting point?
Both. It's kind of what they want, right? So I offer a wide array of things. Like I will help you with your resume, with your cover letter, with your interview if you want, or you can just take the courses that I give and then you can just jump off from there, right? So it can be pretty in depth or it can be as shallow as they want.
That's cool.
It's a very baby company. I
Sure.
left my job 2 years ago, took a year off, and now I'm just like diving into what it really means to have a company of my own. And really, I mean, I have those moments where I'm like, am I really like that good at being an EA? And then I go back and I look, I'm like,
Yes.
I have like 15 years of experience and I am a good EA. But you know, when you're not in the game, you kind of lose that knowledge of how things go. And the game is changing so much all the time that you just need to keep up. And it's hard to do that if you don't know where to start. So
Yeah. What are things that you would suggest to someone in order to stay up on those skills? Obviously, universal assistant.
Yeah.
It would probably be one thing, but like what are other ways on top of that you would recommend?
I mean, it's the things that I could just say the things that I do is I'm constantly going online. Like I will ask AI, what do I need to do to keep up as an executive assistant, and see what AI gives me. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Sure.
Then I'll go to my network and I'll be like, what have you guys done lately, or what's changing in your roles or career that you haven't noticed in the last year, right? Like I'm really always trying to seek out new knowledge, ask new questions. I'm also interested in different things myself, right? Like I'm a continual learner. If I could go to college forever, I would have. I love
as long as you didn't
knowledge,
get
right?
graded.
No, exactly. I never want to get graded. I just want to learn all the information,
right.
right? But like LinkedIn Academy, there's so many different things you can learn. You could do an executive assistant course on LinkedIn Academy, and then it'll show up on your LinkedIn that you're accredited now in that course.
Sure.
There's obviously Skillshares. There is Skillshare or Udemy or different things like that you can go to. But honestly, the best thing that I've ever done is all the jobs that I want. Like I have my LinkedIn things turned on. I'm like remote work, high pay, and then I go and look through the job description, and any skill I don't have, I put that on a piece of paper, and then I go and learn that skill. So then when somebody says, oh, you don't have any project management experience, or you don't really know that program, I'm like, I actually do, and I did it on myself.
Right.
And then I can prove that to them. So just continual learning. Like you can't just stop and stall, right? Like Concur might be the expense report thing we use now, but in 2 years, Concur could be obsolete, right? Like I don't even know if it went bankrupt or not. You know what I mean? So you just have to constantly be keeping up on new programs, new tools, new everything.
Could you tell me about an embarrassing story that you have?
Yeah, no, I totally can. It was my first job as an EA. And my boss was like, hey, he called me in. He had like a smaller office. He had a bunch of guys in his office. They were like workshop and something. And he called me in and he was like, hey, can you take the board down? And I was like, yeah. I came back in with a screwdriver. I was physically like, taking the board down. And he chuckled for a bit. I started laughing and I turned around and was like, is this not what we wanted to do here? He was like, now that I know you're a very literal person, I will be very literal in my speech to you. Can you take the notes on the board down? And I was just so embarrassed. I took a picture of the board and I walked out. I was like, all right, next time get more clarification on what he wants before just doing the task. So yeah.
What a great learning experience.
It was a great learning experience.
Little room for
Man,
confusion.
that one.
I'm more curious, like how long, like the fact that you had a screwdriver just so readily available.
I have everything ready. I have deodorant, like new deodorant for people who are like walking to a meeting, like I need deodorant.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I got it. You just
bag
said
of
AA
tricks with me.
batteries
Yep,
right here.
I do.
Yeah.
Double, triple. I have like laser pointers. I had
That's
a
cool.
bag of tricks with me that I would bring as an executive assistant because I just always wanted to be the person that like had what they needed.
Yeah. You wanted
And
to
it always
Mary
worked out.
Poppins it.
I was Mary Poppins. I was called Mary Poppins a lot, or Dora. Had their little
Dora.
red backpack and just pulled things out of it. I was like, yeah,
That's where the mama bear experience comes in. Kind of like going back to your
yes.
point, right? I think that's really cool.
because you're taking care of people. I find satisfaction in taking care of people in a job well done. So
Yeah.
it worked out.
One last question
Okay,
that came to mind for me as you were talking. A lot of the times your stories have been like you going into a room of a bunch of males.
Yeah.
Or
yes.
execs or like, and so I know there's a stereotype of like, there's either a male or female, and EAs are almost always female.
Yeah.
And you said that earlier that men should strive to be EAs, right? They can do really well if they have the skill set. I'm curious, in a world where women have to really, really fight and work really hard to excel and do well and be in those leadership roles, how do you see that impacting an EA's path, where it's like typically female, but the workplace
is typically male, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think before my last job, I think my mindset was that it is a male's world, and I was just the executive assistant in it. And then I went to a company that had females in senior roles, and I honestly had never seen that before. Multiple females.
That wasn't HR.
In chief roles. Yeah. Exactly. That wasn't HR. And I was like, whoa. That's where I really like honed in on it's the company that you're looking into. It's are they a local company? Are they a national company? Or international company, right? It's also stereotypes of different states, right? Like some states are really ahead of other states.
Right.
But I always just strive to work for companies who recognized talent and learning, right? Like it wasn't just let's elevate them because they're a male, or let's elevate them because they know. I have been in companies like that, and I left those companies pretty fast. But it's choosing the companies whose cultures reflect your values. And I think that that's, if my value is that I'm a woman who can become a chief, I need to find a company who also reflects that. It's as basic as that, because you're not going to really change the culture of a company by yourself.
Yeah.
It takes a long time.
It'd be really tiring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the best thing about being an EA?
Why be an EA at all? My favorite part is being in the room where it happens. Like these CEOs, these SVPs have taken 20 years, decades to get to where they are.
Yeah.
And I took 5 years, and I get to be right next to them, learning from all these super intelligent, really fun people, right? Like, it was the best thing. It was the easiest track to just being a person who got 1,000 really amazing mentors. It also was really cool to see the inner workings of companies, right? Because when I was just an employee, I would only know what my department was doing or what my manager was telling me. But then I got to get behind the scenes, and I was like, oh, this is really cool, right? So I get all the experience of what a CEO has to know, what an SVP has to know, what a VP has to know. And I get to just put all that in my bag of tricks, which was just so fun.
Yeah.
I loved that. And that Spider-Man reference, being the man in the chair, like, it's so cool being the person who directs everything. Like, I'm not a person who really wants to be seen all the time. Like, I don't really like to be on video. I don't really like any of that. But I do like directing things behind the scenes. And I'm really good at that. So if somebody else could be the front person for that, that's great. I'm all about that.
That's cool.
Also, the perks are cool too, right? Like private jets you get to ride on if your boss has that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You get to travel all over the country. You get to meet different people at different trade shows too. And I don't know. It's really fulfilling to actually get something done, right? And you do get to know things that are happening, so you're not really in the dark a lot of the times.
Yeah, it's like getting a sample of how an exec lives.
Yeah, without having to be them.
Yes,
it's perfect.
Without the responsibility.
But
without
the responsibility,
you
I'm like, okay, now I get to go home. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you're not held accountable,
really cool.
but you
not held accountable. Don't have to sign the NDA. Yeah,
but you get to know everything.
It's pretty cool.
It is true that like there's like perceptions about like what those meetings are like.
Oh yeah.
And how those people are, and like you see on TV it's like, oh, everyone wears a suit and they sit around their table and everyone has their whatever, and it's like, nope.
Yeah, you get to sit in the room and listen to them actually like talk about if they care about their employees or not.
Yes.
Or, you get to see the driving force behind it.
Yeah, but it's not always like as formal as people think that it is, and it's just
not
like
at all.
The way that they talk about not just like having those sorts of meetings. And I've sat in a few on a few occasions, and it's just like, oh, these are just people.
Yes,
and
they're just
making
people
decisions based off of whatever information they have.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there was often times where they would turn to me and we're like, what do you think? Like,
what?
Yeah, what do you think? Where do you think we should go? And I was like, me? Little old me? Yeah, it was really cool. You get like a respect level that you all wouldn't get otherwise.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that's really all I had from my end. Any other questions you had?
We just want to say thank you for your time.
Yeah.
We appreciate all you sharing for us. I always feel enlightened whenever we have these conversations about people's jobs, because you see all these people doing their work, and you just never really know what people do behind doors. So
yeah, be an EA, guys, and if you need help, the executive, universal assistant.
I'm just gonna go be an EA.
I got your back.
Maybe
you could if you needed to. Cool, and you'd kill it.
Give us one more plug for your company.
So the Universal Assistant, it is a new company. So if you go to my link right now, you probably won't find as much, but I will be rolling out with creating resumes. I'll be rolling out all the trainings, so you can subscribe to that training. You'll get a weekly training. It probably is like a 6-week course. But I am just all for helping people grow their skills, making sure that if you are an executive assistant, you feel confident in that. You feel that you can go out and get the pay that you want, the job that you want, and feel confident in who you are.
And where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram right now, The Universal Assistant, and then I will have a website, universalassistant.com.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Okay, NaTaya, thank you so
Thanks,
I
much.
appreciate it,
This
guys.
is fun.
Great
Thanks.
meeting you.
Cool.
Cool.